The moment that video hit the internet, the countdown started, not to likes, not to sympathy, but to war. It was just past nightfall in California when a glossy little montage appeared online, wrapped in soft light, homey laughter, and a caption that made jaws tighten on 2 continents. A child credited as the camera person. A family moment turned into a global spectacle. Sweet on the surface, explosive underneath. Within minutes, phones were buzzing in London, advisors were being shaken awake, and a private family matter had detonated into a public crisis that no filter could soften. To casual followers, it looked harmless, cozy, intimate, a mother sharing a slice of life. But behind palace gates, the mood flipped from concern to calculation at record speed, because this wasn't just another celebrity family post. This involved titles, lineage, and 2 children whose lives are permanently tied to an institution that guards privacy like crown jewels. And suddenly, those kids were front and center in a narrative they never signed up for. Whispers started immediately, not from tabloids first, from legal desks. Was this spontaneous, strategic, emotional, calculated? People who make a living reading between the lines were suddenly staring at a 30-second clip like it was a legal document. And the caption, oh, that caption, became the most analyzed sentence of the week. Across the Atlantic, the reaction was icy, controlled, and fast. Senior figures who usually let storms pass quietly decided this one wasn't weather, it was a warning siren. Meetings were called, not the ceremonial kind, the shut the door, phones off kind. Because to them, this wasn't about public image, it was about precedent. If one parent could turn private childhood moments into emotional storytelling for millions, where did the boundary sit? Meanwhile, in California, the mood inside the mansion was described very differently. Calm on the outside, steel underneath. The post wasn't deleted. No apology, no clarification, just silence, the loudest kind. And that silence, it drove the speculation into overdrive. Supporters called it maternal pride. Critics called it narrative control. Neutral observers just grabbed popcorn and refreshed their feeds. What made everything combustible was timing. Legal tensions were already simmering. Custody discussions, privacy disagreements, old wounds barely scabbed over. Then, this video lands like a match in a room full of fumes. Suddenly, every past interview, every podcast quote, every photo release got dragged back into the spotlight. Patterns were being drawn, motives assigned, sides chosen. One royal insider allegedly muttered that this wasn't a family dispute anymore, it was a digital battlefield. Because in the modern world, perception shapes power, and whoever frames the story of the children shapes public sympathy. That's not just emotional territory, that's strategic ground. Back in Britain, the language getting thrown around behind closed doors was stark. Words like safeguarding, protocol, responsibility, not flashy, not dramatic, but heavy, very heavy. The concern, reportedly, wasn't about one post alone. It was about momentum, a drip becoming a stream becoming a narrative river that couldn't be redirected once it flooded. And then there was him, quiet, out of sight. No social media defense, no counterstatement, just a return to familiar soil under circumstances that insiders described as focused, not frantic. People expected heartbreak. They got resolve. The tone from his camp wasn't emotional outrage, it was structured response. Lawyers, not interviews. Documents, not declarations. Those close to him claim he watched the clip more than once. Not as a husband, as a father. And that shift, that emotional pivot, changed the temperature of everything. Because when parental instinct meets institutional machinery, the outcome stops being messy and starts becoming methodical. Publicly, friends of both sides went quiet. That silence said more than any statement could. No celebrity defenders rushing to comment, no talk show monologues, just careful distance. Because nobody wanted to be caught in the crossfire of a story that was moving from gossip columns toward legal corridors. Online, though, absolute chaos. Hashtags exploded. Armchair experts dissected platform policies. Was it a violation? Was it perfectly allowed? Did intention matter more than impact? Comment sections became courtrooms without judges. Everyone had a verdict. No one had full facts. But inside the royal orbit, one idea reportedly hardened into consensus: children cannot be narrative tools. Not for sympathy, not for branding, not for emotional leverage. Whether that belief is old-fashioned or protective depends entirely on who you ask. But the line, insiders say, had been mentally drawn long before this week. The video just made it visible. Still, the other side sees a completely different picture. A mother sharing her life. A woman refusing to let an institution dictate how she expresses love. To her supporters, this isn't exploitation, it's autonomy. And that word, autonomy, is about to collide head-on with tradition, law, and public opinion in a way that guarantees nobody walks away untouched. Because now, this isn't just about a post. It's about who controls the story of two children born into a legacy neither of them chose. Is it the parent with the camera, the parent with the caution, or the institution that says it exists to protect them both? One short video, one soft caption, and suddenly lawyers are drafting, advisors are aligning, and a family fracture that once felt personal now feels historical. And the scariest part? This was just the opening move. By sunrise, the fairy tale lighting of that post had curdled into a full-scale reputational storm, and everyone in power knew it. Inside Buckingham Palace, the mood wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. Advisors weren't panicking, they were outlining scenarios. Best case, the moment faded. Worst case, it became the legal foundation for a complete restructuring of who gets to decide how those children appear before the world. And the more analysts replayed that video, the more convinced they became this wasn't random sentiment, it was positioning. Across the ocean, Meghan Markle was reportedly unmoved by the backlash. No frantic deletions, no teary clarifications, just quiet defiance. To her inner circle, this was being blown out of proportion by an institution obsessed with optics. To the palace, optics were the least of it. They believed they were watching the normalization of something they'd been trying to prevent for years, the slow blending of private childhood and public narrative. And right in the center of that widening gap stood Prince Harry, no longer the torn middleman people once imagined, but a father whose patience, insiders say, had thinned into something colder. Those around him describe a man who has stopped arguing emotionally and started documenting strategically. That shift terrified people more than any outburst could have, because once lawyers enter the room, love letters turn into affidavits. Behind closed doors in the UK, discussions reportedly turned toward one key phrase: long-term psychological footprint. Not headlines, not embarrassment. Impact. Advisors brought in specialists who study how children form identity when their lives are broadcast in fragments. The fear that a child growing up as a symbol in an ongoing parental power struggle starts to see themselves less as a person and more as a storyline. That idea hit hard enough that senior figures who had stayed neutral in past disputes began leaning in one direction: protection first, feelings later. Meanwhile, Hollywood's glittering circle was suddenly awkwardly silent. The usual public cheerleaders were nowhere to be found. No inspirational quotes. No supportive reposts. Industry insiders whispered that aligning publicly now meant choosing between a mother framed as modern and an institution framing itself as guardian. Risky either way. So they did what powerful friends do best when storms hit: they vanished. Back online, supporters doubled down. They argued that motherhood shouldn't require clearance from a centuries-old system, that sharing joy isn't exploitation, that critics were policing emotion. But critics fired back just as hard, saying intention doesn't cancel consequence when millions are watching and children can't consent. And as this debate roared in public, the legal machinery quietly accelerated. Draft proposals began circulating among royal legal advisors outlining stricter digital boundaries for minors tied to the monarchy. Not retroactive punishment, forward control. The philosophy was simple. If you can't stop narrative battles between adults, you at least create guardrails around the kids so they don't become emotional currency. When word of those discussions leaked, the reaction in California was reportedly icy. Sources claim Meghan saw it as an attempt to rewrite motherhood into a regulated role. To her, love isn't a liability. Memory sharing isn't strategy. And the idea that distant officials could weigh in on how she presents her own children? Unacceptable. That's where the emotional argument collides with the institutional one, and neither side is blinking. Friends of Harry say something inside him shifted the moment he realized every future disagreement could now play out through the lens of the children's public presence. Not arguments behind walls, but symbolism in public view. That's when this stopped being about reconciliation and started being about perimeter control. He wasn't trying to win a narrative. He was trying to limit exposure to one. Observers close to Prince William say this was the moment the brothers quietly realigned on one point: childhood should not be collateral damage in adult wars. They may disagree on plenty, but on that, insiders say the line was bright red. And then came the phrase that changed the tone of everything: custodial precedent. Because if one high-profile parent normalizes using children in emotional emotionally loaded storytelling during legal tensions, it sets an example others might follow. That's not palace paranoia, that's legal ripple effect. The monarchy, for all its flaws, is obsessed with precedent. Once a line moves, it rarely moves back. So now, what started as a soft-lit montage has snowballed into a philosophical showdown. Is visibility a right or a risk? Is sharing childhood a form of love or leverage when conflicts exist? Neither side sees themselves as the villain. That's what makes this combustible. Meghan's camp frames her as a mother refusing to let her children be hidden like state secrets. Harry's camp frames him as a father trying to shield them from becoming emotional billboards. Both narratives sound protective, both sound sincere, and both cannot coexist without limits. The tragedy? The only people without a voice in this are the two kids whose images triggered the storm. As legal teams sharpen language and institutions prepare frameworks, the fairy tale branding that once defined this couple is long gone. What's left is colder, quieter, and far more permanent. Not romance versus royalty, not freedom versus tradition, protection versus expression. And when those two values clash in public, there is no clean victory. Only boundaries drawn, enforced, and debated for years to come. Because that video wasn't just a post. It was a line in the sand the world could finally see.